Lincoln is a Kenyan grad from the class of 1989. He has been an executive in the global energy industry for over 25 years, focused on electric power and sustainability. His experience spans the globe and the energy value chain, from emerging technologies to independent power project development to utility operations. He's an internationally recognized thought leader, writer, and speaker on energy, sustainability, and leadership. Lincoln is currently an executive at Burbank Water and Power, an innovative and high-performing electric and water utility in Southern California, providing reliable, affordable, sustainable power and innovative solutions to media giants and residential customers alike. Personally, I met Lincoln about 5 years ago in California when I first graduated from Kenyon and was at a career crossroads. He provided sage advice, which I'm looking forward to him sharing with all of you. Second, let me introduce Dave Heithaus, who will be moderating this event. Dave graduated from Kenyon in 1999 and is a current member of the Kenyon Green Alumni group. He has been back at Kenyon since 2006, first directing lands and facilities at the Brown Family Environmental Center, and now as the director of the Office of Green Initiatives, which coordinates sustainability efforts on and off campus. And without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Dave.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Lincoln and to everybody who's joined us this evening. Really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to a lively set of questions this evening. Lincoln, I was asked to, we have lots of questions came in before the event actually started, and I'd like to point out to everybody that we've got the chat bar open here. So as you form your own questions, please put them in there. I will try to get to all of them in a timely fashion. My guess is we're not going to get to all of them, but I'll try to sort of set them into categories so people get at least generally what they're after from Lincoln. Before we dig into the individual questions, I thought it would be useful, especially coming from the career development perspective, to ask, coming from a liberal arts institution like Kenyon in the late 90s, what was your path from there to where you are now, and what does a normal day look like for you?
Oh boy. First of all, it wasn't the late 90s. You're very kind. It was the late 80s. I'm feeling my age today. Yeah, it's been, some people's careers are well lit, 4-lane divided highways, from junior something to senior something. Mine is really the opposite. Mine is a twisty, up and down, poorly lit 2-lane road through the mountains, sometimes in the driving rain, where you can, barely see beyond, or, all the way to your headlights. So if you had told me in, let's bring it back, new apartments, C3, are the new apartments even there anymore? They are, okay. They're probably even dingier than when I was there.
They are.
But if you told me, Lincoln, you're going to be in the energy business, you're going to be in the sustainability business, you're going to work for a municipal utility for a good part of your career, I would have looked at you like you had 3 heads. I was the classic, clueless, upper middle class liberal arts grad. I was a language major because I got a kick out of languages, and I had a lot of courses. That was literally the extent of the thought process. But I did go to spent time in China junior year in 1988, which was great. Taught junior high school in Japan right afterwards. Ended up going to law school again from a point of view of cluelessness as opposed to intent. And kind of found my way by hook and by crook into independent power, almost by accident. And independent power back in the 90s was utilities and private equity groups going to mostly emerging market countries and really developing power plant projects from scratch. The land, the technical aspects, the contracts, all the commercial aspects, all the regulatory aspects. And when I started in that business, I couldn't have told you what a power plant looked like, but I found that I had a real passion for it, and that I was never I've never been the expert around the table, but my and I put this down to the liberal arts education. I've really found a skill and a passion in both organizing groups of experts to get complicated things done, but then also communicating, except for my very gravelly voice today, I apologize. Also communicating, whether it's to experts or to stakeholders who don't know a power plant from the hole in the wall. It's been a very, very interesting path, and that path has gone from emerging markets, independent power development, to mergers and acquisitions, to workouts, basically extracting my employer from very troubled investments overseas, to a little bit of venture capital, a little bit of some private equity, and now very much in public service in municipal government. So Burbank Water and Power we're in sunny Southern California, and when we are what people think of when they think of Hollywood. So the Disney studios are here, Warner Brothers studios are here, Nickelodeon, SpongeBob is literally right across the street. Really cool building, by the way. Cartoon Network is right up the street. So we've got these massive media giants, but then we've also got a very vocal and very progressive residential population. And we serve that with a utility that is small, but covers the entire value chain. And that means that we own power plants all over the West. We have transmission rights that bring power in. We get to make decisions all over the value chain in the context of California's very aggressive environmental goals, and our local, even more aggressive environmental goals. So it's been an incredible ride, but if you had asked me again, new apartment C3 back in '89, I would have thought you were crazy.
One might argue we're crazy to be in new apartment C9. This is an Ask Me Anything, Lincoln. So I'm gonna try to start a little slow, and we'll build into the really Ask Me Anythings. But I think one that rose to the top of my list that came in earlier today, and you being where you are, is according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it will require approximately $2.5 trillion annually through 2035 to reshape and transform our global energy systems to renewables. From within the field, can you speak to whether we are on track to do this? And if not, where are we lacking in investments in progress?
Sure, that is a very complex, multifaceted question. But let me try to pick out a couple of highlights. I believe that in California, we are as on track, I'm choosing my words carefully, as on track as anybody to meet those sorts of goals. We have really a very clear roadmap from the state of California from now until 2045 to get to zero greenhouse gas power. And I actually believe that 2045 is going to become 2035 or 2030 here within a very short time. So I feel like within California and some other more progressive states, you will see that sort of transformation. The problem is that the electric business is very much a creature of state regulation as opposed to federal regulation. And that means that at the same time that we are going 1,000,000 miles an hour in the right direction, we have neighbors who I won't, as state neighbors that I won't mention their names, who are have their foot on the brake and the emergency brake pulled all the way up, and their wheels tilted toward the curb. So it's very much a patchwork. It's a very balkanized sort of approach that we have. Other countries have been much more successful in creating national policies that need to be followed, whereas the US is still very much a patchwork of the incredibly progressive, like Hawaii and California and New York, for example, and there are a bunch of others. But then folks who would much rather stay exactly where things are, or better yet, exactly where things were 30 years ago. So, and that's again a creature of this state level control rather than federal control. The other part of that, though, is that it's very, and I'll just pick out just one other highlight, is that in my business we tend, and I think in the popular imagination too, we tend to focus on power production. So we tend to look at, there's a solar farm, there's a wind project, and that's only really part of the picture. One of the challenges that we have is that renewables are much less efficient users of transmission capability, the big wires, than a coal plant or a natural gas plant or a nuclear plant. So we don't have enough transmission already, and the only way we're going to import significant amounts of renewables into places like LA, load centers, we call them, is with a whole lot more transmission. And then finally, and transmission isn't frankly as sexy as power generation. Even less sexy is energy efficiency. And yet energy efficiency is the most important thing we can do. If you never have to generate and transmit and distribute a kilowatt hour of energy, that is the cleanest possible thing you can do. At the same time, though, and this is, take this with a grain of salt because I'm in the utility business, the electric sector in California is only about 16% of the GHG emissions in the state. And that percentage is going down pretty decisively over time. Transportation is over 40%, and that's going up in terms of the GHG output. So at the same time that we're re-engineering and rebuilding the power system to make it greener and greener and greener, the big fish in the pond is transportation. And how do we electrify transportation and get that 40+%, not just lower, but trending lower as well. So there are a whole lot of moving parts here that make that a complex question. And, you know, again, from a utility perspective, where should we be making our focus? Our focus, the focus so far has been on the utility business because the power system's dirty. We gotta fix that. But the next big target, and frankly, the much bigger bang for the buck, is going to be electrifying transportation, from cars to buses to heavy duty trucks. That's where you're really going to see the greenhouse gas coming down for the economy as a whole. So those are a couple of highlights, but that in and of itself is probably, you know, a 2-day conference to answer that one.
Great, thanks. Well, and you touched on this, so I'm going to jump on to one more question that was pre-submitted before I get to the chat bar. You know, how active are utility companies in investing in some of those energy efficiency projects, or even offsetting types of things like forest carbon sequestration, agrovoltaics, et cetera?
I can speak for Burbank Water and Power, and actually for California utilities in general. We are incredibly aggressive with energy efficiency programs and conservation programs. So much so that our electric loads, the total demand that we serve over the course of the year, should be going up as our world gets more electrified. You know, we're adding electric cars are still a coming thing even here, but you know, we literally charge everything, you know, that we touch And this Zoom call, who knows how much this is using. So the overall electric use in society is actually going way up. But we've been so effective in Burbank with energy efficiency that what we're seeing is actually going down. We've taken what would naturally go up, and we've injected so much energy efficiency into that equation that the loads that we see, the electric demand that we see, is actually going down. Now, there's an issue there about, you got your low-hanging fruit, and then your medium fruit, and then your fruit that's way high up in the tree. We've been really successful with the low-hanging fruit. Now it's a question of where do we find the next levels of efficiency and the next levels of conservation, so that we can continue that trend. And so it's technology innovation, it's business model innovation. But yeah, so far we've been incredibly effective. And I'm blanking on the second half of your question.
I think you got most of it. It was investing in efficiency, and then also offset type technology. So you're maximizing efficiency for multiple uses, such as agrovoltaics, or directly investing in offset projects like reforestation for carbon sequestration through land management and things of that nature.
We like to invest in things that we can see and measure, and frankly that we can count on. Just to speak to reforestation projects just for a second, I mean, that on a global basis, that is extraordinarily important. The world will not survive if we keep tearing down the forests. But from a utility perspective, what I think the markets have found over the last 20 or so years is that those reforestation projects are very, very difficult to invest in with confidence. There have been real challenges with not only making sure that what you're investing in is actually happening, but that it's still there. Those trees are still there 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So we tend to go with the stuff that we understand, the stuff that we can see locally, and that ends up being lighting retrofits. We do a tremendous job with, we actually offer this for free. I wish I lived in Burbank because I could take advantage of this, but we actually will do a free home energy assessment and give people great deals on much more efficient appliances. We do a tremendous amount with our commercial customers in terms of lighting and HVAC and insulation. So it's something we're really aggressive about. Again, to the point where our electric demand is actually going down when it should be going up.
Great. I'm going to get to the chat bar here. It's an interesting one. We're talking about renewable energy. What are your thoughts on nuclear power, especially considering some of the recent innovations in nuclear reactor technology?
I am cautiously excited about it. I see the challenges with nuclear as ultimately engineering challenges. Obviously you got to put the waste somewhere, and I don't know what the right answer is for that. I wish I had an answer for it. I don't. But when I tend to think of the world less about renewable energy as a goal and more about renewable energy as a tool to meet the goal, and the goal being zero greenhouse gases and zero particulate emissions. So when you look at it from that context, nuclear energy is greenhouse gas free. It is, emissions free, but it does have the waste issue hanging over it. I honestly don't know what we do with that. I think we've solved a lot of, or maybe all of the operational safety issues. Obviously out in California, we've got the Diablo nuclear plant that somebody decided to build right over a major fault line. Bad idea. But then you look at the Palo Verde plant, which we're a part of out near Phoenix, and best run nuclear plant probably in the world. Exemplary safety record. So I think those issues have been solved. I think it really comes down to a policy decision, a societal trade-off between greenhouse gas-free energy that is base load. In other words, it runs 24/7. And it has, I don't want to get too deep into the physics, but with inertia, in other words, it's rotating mass, and that as that turbine spins, and that actually provides incredible stability to the rest of the system, especially as you're adding things like solar energy, things like wind energy that don't provide that stability to the system. And that's a rabbit hole that we don't need to go down, but there are a lot of advantages to something like nuclear. But again, tremendous disadvantages that we got to get our arms around.
We've got lots pouring in here in the group chat. I'm going to deviate just for a minute because Jazz has been so good as to arrange this, and she is the career development office. I'm going to move in the career development angle for just a second. Lincoln, could you describe? This is a tough one, but generally speaking, the types of people that thrive in this field, understanding that it's a diverse field with a lot of different roles, and also kind of along with that question, in the context of your take on the trajectory of the field over the next 10 years, like what kinds of things might people think about honing up on to be successful in renewable energy?
Sure. Let me answer it two ways, actually. Let me answer it as a renewable energy question and then as a broader sustainability question. I think, renewable energy is a fascinating field. It really started getting moving in the early 2000s when you started to see larger scale solar projects, larger scale wind projects, larger scale geothermal projects. And back then, it was actually a very, very creative field because nobody knew quite how to design these things. A lot of things were custom. Nobody quite knew how to insure them, how to create offtake contracts, sales contracts for them. Nobody knew quite how to structure project financing around them so that they could, so that you had the money to get them built. It's become, and that was a very exciting time. It's become, in my view, a bit more of it's a lot more straightforward now. Construction looks a lot more like, big electric Legos than it did, 20 years ago. A lot of the patterns and a lot of the precedent has been set in terms of making renewable energy happen. That's at the utility scale. At the local scale, though, in terms of rooftops, I think there's still a whole lot more innovation that can happen at that level. And I think we're still figuring that out, both between solar panels on rooftops as well as batteries in garages. I think there's a tremendous amount of possibility there. And the truth is that these projects are so multifaceted that they benefit from every skill set. Whether you are like my wife, Kenyon grad, class of 90, big surprise. Kenyon grad marries Kenyon grad. She was an English major, and she's not in the energy business, but there's a whole lot of, there's a huge place for folks who are, both great writers, great speakers in the energy business. You need the engineers, you need the lawyers, you need the finance people, you need the tax people and the accountants, you need the policy people. So there are opportunities across the board in making this happen. So I guess my advice there would be to identify what you're good at, identify what value you want to bring to the industry, and then find a role that will get your foot in the door by adding that value. And then you can expand from there. I've been working with engineers for 25 years, and I feel like I've kind of got an engineering degree by osmosis at this point. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gotten my foot in the door, based on what I knew at the time and what I was good at the time. The other advice I would give, if you have any interest in this at all, is, and this is especially for the English majors, grit your teeth and take an accounting course, grit your teeth and take a finance course. You will never regret it in terms of speaking the language of business in a way that will allow you to do the fun stuff going forward. When you look at this as a little bit broader as a sustainability question, that's when, in my view, every job is a sustainability job these days. I think there are, and frankly, we need everybody. We need literally every skill set to look at our society and look at our economies in new ways. But again, if you want to be in the business world, I would really strongly encourage get some accounting background, get some finance background, and then frankly, walk through every door that you can crack open. If your boat, if the ship doesn't sail, if your ship doesn't come in, swim out to it. All those usual cliches. It's just a tremendous time to be in energy. It's a tremendous time to be in sustainability in general.
Great, thanks so much. Going back to something you mentioned early on, which is the state by state approach to how renewables are dealt with from a policy perspective. In Ohio, the question is public funds cannot be used to provide renewables on public buildings such as new schools. Is this something that, as far as you're aware, is common in the country, or is this the result of a uniquely GOP state legislature in Ohio?
It sounds like the latter. I don't know the specifics. When you look at a fully, take Burbank for example, which is 17 square miles, almost entirely built out, and we have a big thriving school system and a full service city government. So that's a lot of roofs. That's a lot of roof space and a lot of electric needs. So when you think about rooftop solar, those are, to me, natural places to put that. And frankly, from my perspective, as somebody who's worries about the power system 24/7, the idea of doing it on public buildings is very attractive, because then my power system operators can control it for the benefit of the grid, keeping the cost down, keeping the reliability up. But at the same time, and part of keeping the cost down is doing it on as large a scale as possible. And when you're looking at, for example, a high school building, that's a pretty big scale rooftop solar project. So the costs of that power are going to be a lot lower than on than on a typical single family home. So I think in my opinion, there are tremendous advantages to doing it not just on municipal buildings, school buildings, but also financed with, through the city. My cost of capital is like 3%, which for any finance or economics people out there is pretty much free money. Whereas if you're doing it on your home, you're probably paying twice that. So it just gets more expensive. The per unit cost gets more expensive. So I think it's a great idea, but clearly Ohio doesn't, unfortunately.
So this is one that I think, again, we'll come back to the state by state argument. But there was a question about the relationship between lobbyists, people who are pushing for policy changes, and people who are actually in the utilities. I mean, would you say, generally speaking, that these two efforts are working effectively together, adequately supporting one another, or is that a place where or better relationships would aid better policy?
I think it's the latter. Obviously, I think about California, which is from a policy perspective, a uniformly progressive state when it comes to energy and the environment. So everybody is pushing. I think everybody is rowing in the same direction. One of the things that I find, though, from the utilities perspective, and one of the things that I've been working very hard on, is actually educating the policymakers and the staffs of the policymakers, which is how things actually get done, on the realities of the utility business. The fact that in order to build the things that we need to build, we're making investments that are measured in decades and that are paid off in decades. And so it's very, very difficult for us to change course as rapidly as folks would like us to, only because, I've got a big natural gas fired power plant about 200 feet from me that, we financed over 20 years because that was the right thing to keep the power affordable. But at the same time, I've got to pay for that. I got to pay the mortgage on that until 2037. Now we can walk away from that, but it would cause our electric rates to go through the roof, and which of course, runs counter to your larger goals of electrification of transportation, for example. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is really educate the policymakers on the realities of keeping the power affordable, keeping the power reliable, while at the same time pressing that sustainability accelerator as close to the floor as we possibly can. And that is an ongoing effort, both at the local level and the state level, and also at the federal level.
Could you, another interesting one, could you speak to the intermittent nature of renewable energy in the form of solar PV and solar, and how that relates to where we are and where we might be in the not too distant future relative to storage?
Yeah, that's something that we actually, we sweat bullets over every day here, because obviously we have very, very aggressive renewable plans. We have a tremendous solar resource. And most of the utility scale investments in renewables in California and the Southwest in general are in solar. Now, solar is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but like any source of electricity, it's also a tremendous compromise. So the compromises are really twofold. One is that, as you point out, it's intermittent. We've got part of a solar project out by Las Vegas, and you can watch the output of that plant bounce from zero to full output to zero to full output as the clouds go over in the sky. It's literally that sensitive. And of course, nobody wants their lights to come on and go off and come on and go off. So you've got to find a way on a system basis to what we call integrate that, create a reliable electric service out of an unreliable electric supply. So a big part of our job is closing that gap between intermittency and reliability in our part of the power system. So one of the ways you can do that, obviously, is with storage. I'm sorry. So the other compromise with any sort of power generation, but solar in particular, are the life cycle environmental costs. We just did some really groundbreaking research on this here about a year ago. When you look at the rare earth metal extraction at the front end, and the processing, and then the recycling or the disposal at the back end, you've actually got a surprisingly large environmental footprint for something that is entirely clean when it's actually operating. So there are compromises inherent in everything, and solar is no exception. You look at the same thing with batteries and with other storage technologies. Batteries are kind of the top of mind for folks, so I'll speak to those. With batteries, you also have tremendous environmental compromises at the front end and the back end. Actually pretty horrifying, and we're trying to get our arms around those as we speak. But the challenge with batteries is really twofold. One is the fact that they cost an enormous amount of money. They still do. To make a big impact, you're talking about huge investments, which drive up electric rates, which make it less attractive to electrify transportation, for example, and reach your bigger goals. But then you've also got issues with batteries in terms of siting them and fire risk and simply the amount of real estate that they take up when they're deployed. So storage is going to be something that is going to be part of the fabric of the power grid I think in very short order. But again, like everything in the electric system, everything associated with energy, there are huge compromises that you see with eyes wide open and do your best to take care of. Dave, you're muted.
Sorry, a bit of a follow-up question, and Carson, good to virtually see you too. Carson has heard that the estimates for electrifying buildings and transportation would increase electricity demand 2 to 3 times from current levels, depending on improvements in energy efficiency. One, what are the implications of this going to be from a demand management perspective for a utility? And two, if the increase in demand happens quickly, could it be met through new renewable generation with current technology? Or do you think that new natural gas or other fossil fuel plants would still need to be needed in the next 10 to 20 years?
Let me answer the last part first. I don't see very much need for new fossil plants at all. That said, one of the things that we're intimately involved in is taking a different look at fossil fuel plants, natural gas plants, not running on natural gas, but actually running on green hydrogen. And we're involved, along with LA Department of Water and Power next door, we're involved in a project out in Utah. We're repowering, we call it repowering, term of art. We are shutting down a 30-year-old coal plant in 2025, and we will be switching on a smaller combined cycle natural gas plant. I'm too much jargon, I apologize. A plant that will run on 70% natural gas, 30% green hydrogen, and then over the next 10 years from 2025 to 2035, it will shift to ideally 100% green hydrogen. So it will be the magic renewable solution of being both controllable, non-intermittent, but also zero greenhouse gas. But I don't see a need for much new natural gas capacity. And of course, I don't see any need for any new coal capacity going forward. When you look at load growth associated with widespread electrification, there are a lot of estimates out there. 2 to 3 times, is certainly possible. I've seen estimates that are all over the place, but certainly there will be a much greater need for electricity. And if we're going to meet our goals, that electricity has to be renewable, or at least zero greenhouse gas electricity. So I think what you're going to find in order to meet that is that we're going to need to build a whole lot more in terms of wind and solar and geothermal and green hydrogen and everything else. We're probably going to have to build more of those big ugly transmission lines from where the power is produced to where it's consumed. But then we're also going to be taking, I think, a new look at local power generation, like rooftop solar, which is currently about 4 times more expensive than the big utility scale projects out in the desert. But I think the economics of those are going to change because we're going to run up on limits in terms of bringing the power in from the desert, limits on those transmission lines, limits on our ability to build new transmission lines. And so the economics of local solar, the economics of local storage are going to start to look much more attractive. And we're going to end up with, frankly, a much more resilient grid, I think, from all of this, because we're going to have more generation at the end of the line, more lines coming in, and then a whole lot more generation locally that should be, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or earthquakes, we should have a much more resilient system as we go along.
So here's one that bounces off the sort of the transmission piece a little bit. What are your thoughts on solar energy tax incentives and buyback programs? Does encouraging home solar energy generation actually assist our goals for sustainability, or is it more of a fad?
I don't think it's a fad. I just think it's right now, it's more expensive. Like I said, about 4 times more expensive to build, to have solar on rooftops as opposed to massive solar farms out in the desert. I don't think it's a fad at all, though. I think that's where the world is heading. The world is heading from the macro to the micro, ultimately. I wrote a piece about this a couple of years ago. Actually, Kenyan reference. The David Foster Wallace commencement speech that you guys probably all know, like water to a fish. I actually think that probably within your lifetimes, energy will be so local that it will actually be like water to a fish. We won't even know it's there. Everything will be photovoltaic. Everything will have storage in it. Every road or most roads will be electric, photovoltaic. That's where we're heading. We're heading from the macro to the micro. Will your grandchildren know what a transmission line looks like? I don't know. We may have moved, I hope we've moved past that by that point. That said, rooftop solar today is more expensive. In a lot of markets, it does need that subsidy if you want to make it happen. That's a big policy question for much smarter people than I am, whether it makes sense to kickstart that market with subsidies now or to let it evolve naturally. I can tell you from Burbank's perspective, most of you probably know that the cost of solar has absolutely plummeted over the last number of years. And so to absolutely unheard of low levels. So it's gotten a lot cheaper. What we found in Burbank is that we actually had a subsidy program for our customers. And the subsidy ran out in 2013, I think. And what we found was people didn't care. The prices of rooftop solar were low enough at that point that we actually saw an increase in installation without the subsidy, as opposed to a decrease. So that may be just our individual experience, but I think I'm very cautious about subsidies because I think the money can often be used for better purposes, but it's a huge policy question. Do we want to incentivize it now and spend those finite dollars to help people do things that may not be economic? Or do we want the economics to catch up? And of course, it's a chicken and the egg. But I ultimately see that as where the world is going. The world is going to a micro and distributed energy system, and maybe not in my lifetime, but definitely in yours.
So you may have just pre-answered this one, but this one caught my eye as an interesting technical question that may have a relatively quick answer. So we wonder here in Gambier, and as you remember, the power goes out when a squirrel farts, but why don't the utilities just bury all of the lines? Why do we still have these overhead transmission lines instead of, worming them in, using boring technology to protect these lines underground to maybe spend a little more upfront, but not have to deal with repairs?
That's a great question, and one that we struggle with as an industry. There are a couple of aspects to the answer. One is that yes, undergrounded lines are more reliable. They're not 100% reliable, but they're a lot more reliable than overhead lines. And for us, it's not so much squirrels as mylar balloons and palm fronds. Although we do, we do have our adventurous squirrels out here too. So you do have a reliability advantage, especially in places like the Northeast, for example, where you get nor'easters coming through, you get ice storms. The challenge, though, there are a couple of challenges. One is the biggest one is cost. it costs, and I don't remember the multiplier off the top of my head, but it is a multiple more expensive to underground lines, even in the best soil conditions. And that raises a separate issue. When you're drilling through, the soybean field soil of central Illinois, for example, that is a relatively easy, a lower cost undergrounding. If you're in the Northeast where you're hitting, a boulder every 3 feet, that gets way more expensive, eye-wateringly expensive. So it depends a lot on local geology, but and it also depends on, you've got to make a cost-benefit analysis. Does it make more sense, excuse me, economically to underground and gain reliability that way? Or is it more cost-effective, for example, to put some Tesla batteries in your garage and try to store enough power to ride out an outage? Are there other ways that you can enhance reliability in a more cost-effective way than doing an expensive undergrounding project? But again, the advantages are there. It's just that the disadvantages, depending on where you are, can be overwhelming, especially with when you're looking at economically disadvantaged communities that may have a really difficult time absorbing the additional cost in their energy bills. One in 4 Americans struggles to pay their energy bill every month. 1 in 4. 1 in 5, I think, actually has to make a decision between paying for healthcare, paying for food, and paying their utility bill. So we're not talking about, that 1 in 5. I mean, that's look around the room. There is a tremendous sensitivity to electricity prices. And so when you think about undergrounding, it becomes a fairly complex analysis. What are your alternatives? But can your ratepayers, can your customers afford that additional reliability? So a lot of factors that play into that.
Thank you, Lincoln, and thank you everybody who have been submitting questions. There are a lot of great ones. I'm very sorry we're not going to get to all of them, and as the hour winds down, there was one that came in a little earlier that I think might be a reasonable follow up to this one, and Lincoln, where you ended with the idea of the folks who are struggling with paying their utility bills along with their other expenses. Are there, Burbank, you said 17 square miles, very built out. How does the green energy economy come to rural America? I mean, are there specific technologies or techniques or strategies that play to less population dense areas like Knox County?
Certainly more challenging. Certainly more challenging. The density of an urban environment is going to give you an ability, to make smaller investments that have an impact on more people. When you start to spread things out, the costs go up and the number of people that you benefit tend to go down. So, and we saw this back in the 1930s, for example, when we were trying to electrify rural America, going from zero electricity to some electricity. How you take the enormous costs of running miles and miles and miles of line just to serve a single customer, for example, that became a huge policy question back in the 30s and 40s that we had to solve so that we could have more or less universal electrification. And so we now face that same sort of thing in terms of overhauling the electric system for rural customers, widely dispersed customers, often in difficult topographies. How do we bring those solutions to those customers? And then based on where they are and what their needs are, what are the right solutions? So I actually see what I talked about in terms of granular solutions happening in rural America perhaps earlier than they will in urban America, such that you may have, for example, a farm that is way at the end of a line and decides, you know what, I'm going to take an acre and build solar panels. I'm going to put a shipping container down full of batteries, and given the, my need for a reliable electric supply, that's a reasonable investment for me. It's a big investment, but it's a reasonable investment for me to meet my needs. I think there's going to have to be some subsidy there, honestly, in the same way that there was subsidy 100 years ago in electrifying the country. I wish I had a great answer for that. The other part of that is transportation. It's very easy to own an electric car in urban America. Very, very easy. There's enough charging infrastructure now, and the distances traveled are short enough. When you start getting out into the rural areas, you're talking about much less charging infrastructure and many, many, many more miles traveled. So, again, I don't have an answer for that. Maybe it's a hydrogen answer. Maybe it's a hybrid answer where you have, gasoline and batteries being the right answer for that environment. Back to careers. These are things that people are going to make their careers out of, solving these problems. It's just the industry, the whole world is going to change more in the next 10 years than it has in the last 100, more in the next decade than it has in the last century. And frankly, all of these problems, everything that we've talked about, is going to need super smart, super engaged, super creative people, literally from every background and every, whether you're an English major or a physics major or an economics major, or wherever you're coming from. This is the most exciting time to be in utilities, to be in energy, to be in sustainability. And frankly, we need everybody. We need all hands on deck to solve these problems.
Lincoln, thank you so much. I think that is a perfect place to close the evening. I can't thank you enough for your time and your insights. And Jazz, if you have anything left, I think we're at the close of the hour, and it might be time to wish everybody well.
Thank you. I'm actually going to let Erin Koleski close us out, and I will be dropping a couple of helpful links in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Jazz. And thank you again, Lincoln. And thank you to everyone for taking some time out of your evening to spend with us. Lincoln, hopefully it's all right to say, you can contact him on LinkedIn if you have more questions.
Yes.
LinkedIn will be great. You can contact him there and he can help you with more questions. Before we all sign off, I just want to make a quick plug for the Kenyon Green Alumni Network. If you're an alumni that's in a green career, you want to be in a green career, or you're just interested in staying up to date in Kenyon's green initiatives, you can sign up for our Google group with the link that Jazz is going to put in the chat, or you can join our group on the Kenyon Career Network. Students who are interested in connecting with Kenyon Green Alumni for networking, career advice, or to learn about green jobs can also contact us through the Kenyon Career Network or our email address, kga.network@gmail.com, which we'll also put in the chat. And then, Jazz, I think you sent those links to me privately and not to the full
Just realized that. Thank you.
Awesome. And if you have any ideas for future KGA talks, virtual events, or topics you'd like to see us discuss, you can comment them now, or you can shoot us an email again at kga.network@gmail.com. And then finally, you are all also welcome to join us for a virtual celebration of Kenyon Green Initiatives on January 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The event will celebrate progress of Kenyon's green centers and the ambitious plans for the next 25 years, featuring Noelle Jordan from the Brown Family Environmental Center, Lisa Schott of the Philander Chase Conservancy, Amy Hendrickson from the hosting Nature Preserve, Ryan Hoddle of the Kenyon Farm, and then moderated by Dave again. So thank you all again. You can drop your ideas for future events in the chat. Otherwise, have a great evening.
And I will drop also the link. I just dropped the link for the celebration of green initiatives, if anybody would like to sign up for that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jazz.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Lincoln.
Lincoln.
Thanks, Lincoln.